The roar that split the air that afternoon in the Kenyan savannah turned my blood to ice. I stood frozen, watching as the massive male lion emerged from the tall grass just 30 feet ahead of me, his golden eyes locked onto mine with a cold, primal hunger. In that moment, I knew with terrible certainty that I was going to die. There was nowhere to run, no tree to climb, no weapon to defend myself. Just me, Father Thomas, alone and face to face with one of nature's most perfect predators. As the lion's muscles tensed to spring, I closed my eyes and whispered a final prayer to Our Lady Aparecida, whose small medallion I'd carried since childhood. What happened next would forever change not only my life, but the lives of everyone in our mission. I wasn't always a missionary priest in Kenya. My story begins in the coastal city of Salvador, in Brazil's northeastern state of Bahia. I was born to a middle-class family, my father an accountant, my mother a schoolteacher, and raised in a home where faith was as natural as breathing. Our modest house always had two focal points: the family dinner table and the small altar to Nossa Senhora Aparecida that my grandmother had established in the corner of our living room. That little shrine, with its blue cloth and the dark wooden statue of Brazil's patroness, was where I first learned to pray. Growing up, I was an ordinary boy in most ways. I played football with my friends in the streets, studied hard enough to please my parents, but not so much to be called a bookworm, and dreamed of becoming a pilot. But something changed when I turned 15. My parish priest, Father Antonio, invited me to join a youth group that served meals at a homeless shelter on Sundays after Mass. I went reluctantly at first, pushed by my mother's gentle insistence. The shelter was in one of Salvador's poorest neighborhoods, where the glittering tourist beaches seemed a world away. On my third Sunday there, I met an elderly man named João, who had once been a professor of literature before mental illness and misfortune had left him on the streets. As I served him soup, he looked up at me with clear, intelligent eyes and said, "You have the hands of someone who will feed many." I didn't understand what he meant then, but his words stayed with me, buried like a seed in the soil of my consciousness. By 18, while my classmates were applying to universities, I found myself drawn to the seminary. My parents were surprised. There were no priests in our family history, but they supported my decision with quiet pride. The day I left home, my grandmother pressed her medallion of Nossa Senhora Aparecida into my palm. "She has watched over Brazil for centuries," she told me, her voice breaking slightly. "Now she will watch over you, wherever God takes you." Seminary life was both more difficult and more fulfilling than I had imagined. The discipline, the silence, the rigorous theological studies, all of it challenged me. There were nights I lay awake questioning my path, wondering if I had made a mistake. But always, in moments of deepest doubt, I would hold grandmother's medallion and feel a strange certainty wash over me, as if Our Lady herself was reassuring me that I was exactly where I needed to be. I was ordained at 26, serving first in my home diocese in Salvador. My days were filled with masses, confessions, baptisms, and the rhythm of parish life. It was good work, meaningful work, but after 3 years, I began to feel a growing restlessness. The words of Jesus to go and make disciples of all nations echoed persistently in my prayers. When a visiting missionary bishop from Kenya spoke at our diocese about the need for priests in East Africa, something inside me resonated like a bell struck at perfect pitch. 6 months later, after a whirlwind of applications, interviews, and tearful goodbyes, I landed in Nairobi with 2 suitcases and a heart full of both terror and exhilaration. Kenya was nothing like I had imagined, and everything I hadn't known to dream of. The landscape shifted dramatically from the bustling streets of Nairobi to the sweeping savannas where I was eventually assigned. My mission was in Amboseli, in the shadow of Mount Kilimanjaro, where our small Catholic outpost served several Maasai villages spread across miles of semi-arid grassland. The Maasai people, tall, proud, and wrapped in their distinctive red cloths, viewed me with curiosity and initial suspicion. I was an outsider twice over, neither Kenyan nor Maasai, with my Portuguese accent mangling both English and my attempts at Ma, the local language. My first year was a lesson in humility. Everything I thought I knew about being a priest seemed inadequate here. The theology that had made perfect sense in the classrooms of Salvador often failed to translate into the worldview of the Maasai. I learned to listen more than speak, to observe more than direct. Gradually, through shared meals, through sitting with elders, through treating their children's fevers with medicines from our modest clinic, trust began to form, a fragile bridge between worlds. In my second year, a drought hit the region. The land cracked under the relentless sun, and the Maasai's precious cattle began to die. I watched families who had been proud and self-sufficient reduced to accepting emergency food aid. It was during this crisis that I truly became part of the community. Together with local leaders, I organized water distribution and helped coordinate with international relief agencies. I stopped being merely the foreign priest and became Father Thomas, someone who shared in both their suffering and their resilience. As the drought finally broke with life-giving rains, I felt a deepening of my vocation. This was why I had been called so far from home, not to impose my understanding of faith, but to witness God's presence in a people whose spiritual connection to the land and to each other humbled me daily. Their joy when the first green shoots appeared in the earth was a more profound expression of resurrection than any Easter homily I had ever delivered. By my third year, I had established a routine. Twice a week, I would travel by motorcycle to the outlying villages to celebrate Mass, teach catechism, and provide basic medical care. The other days were spent at our main mission, where we had a small church, a one-room school, and the clinic. Life was challenging, but deeply satisfying. I wrote long letters home to my family, describing the majesty of Kilimanjaro at dawn and the wisdom I was learning from Maasai elders. It was during one of my regular journeys between villages that the incident with the lion occurred. I had set out early that Tuesday morning on my motorcycle, carrying medicines for a child with malaria in a village called Nkongu, about 20 miles from our main mission. The savannah was especially beautiful that day. Recent rains had turned the normally golden grass a vibrant green, and wildflowers dotted the landscape like scattered jewels. I remember thinking that this must be how Eden looked, unspoiled and alive with God's creative energy. The trouble began when my motorcycle suddenly sputtered and died about 5 miles from my destination. I'm no mechanic, but I tried everything I knew, checking the fuel, the spark plug, kicking the starter again and again. Nothing worked. With no cell phone signal and knowing that few vehicles pass this remote track, I decided to walk the remaining distance. I gathered the medical supplies in my backpack, secured the motorcycle as best I could, and set off on foot. The sun climbed higher as I walked, and despite my wide-brimmed hat, sweat soon soaked my clerical shirt. I had brought only one small bottle of water, not expecting to be stranded. As I rationed sips, I thought ruefully of how the Maasai could read the landscape for hidden water sources, a skill I still lacked despite my years here. The weight of the medical supplies grew heavier with each mile, but the thought of the waiting child pushed me forward. About an hour into my walk, I began to feel uneasy. It wasn't anything specific at first, just a prickling awareness that something had changed. The bird song that had accompanied my journey gradually ceased. The air seemed to thicken with tension. I scanned the horizon, but saw nothing unusual in the rolling sea of grass. Still, years in this land had taught me to respect such instincts. The Maasai elders often spoke of how the savannah itself speaks to those who know how to listen. In that moment, it seemed to be whispering a warning. I quickened my pace, fighting the urge to run, knowing that fleeing often triggers predators' chase instincts. My hand reached instinctively for the medallion of Our Lady Aparecida that hung around my neck beneath my shirt. Its familiar contours offered comfort as my fingers traced the outline of Mary's figure. "Stay with me," I whispered in Portuguese, falling back on my mother tongue in this moment of stress. It was then that I first saw the flattened grass, a winding trail where some large animal had recently passed. Fresh tracks pressed into the damp earth told a story I didn't want to read. Lion. And not just any lion, a large male, judging by the size of the paw prints. My blood turned cold despite the heat. Male lions typically hunt at night, but this was the dry season when prey becomes scarce and predators grow desperate. A lion hunting by day was likely hungry, and a hungry lion fears nothing. I considered my options. Going back meant at least 2 hours of walking exposed before reaching my motorcycle, which wasn't even working. Continuing forward might lead me closer to the lion, but also closer to the village where help waited. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to press on, but with extreme caution. I picked up a sturdy branch to use as a walking stick, a pathetically inadequate weapon against a lion, but better than nothing. The next mile passed in a state of hyper-awareness. Every rustle in the grass, every distant call of an animal set my nerves jangling. I found myself praying continuously, a stream of desperate pleas to God and Nossa Senhora Aparecida. The medallion seemed to grow warm against my skin, though that was surely just my rising body heat as fear and exertion took their toll. I had just begun to believe I might reach the village safely when I crested a small rise and found myself at the edge of a clearing. And there, drinking from a small seasonal pond about 50 yards away, was the lion. Even at that distance, I could see his magnificent mane, darker than the tawny body, framing his massive head. He hadn't noticed me yet, focused as he was on quenching his thirst. Time seemed to stop. I knew I should back away slowly, quietly, before he detected my presence, but my feet felt rooted to the earth, my muscles frozen in primal fear. In that moment of paralysis, the worst happened. The wind shifted. The lion's head snapped up, water dripping from his muzzle as he caught my scent. Our eyes met across the clearing, predator and prey, in an ancient, terrible recognition. The lion turned fully toward me, his tail beginning to swish slowly from side to side. I knew enough about big cats to understand this was not a good sign. With deliberate calm that belied the storm of fear inside me, I began to back away, maintaining eye contact while trying to appear larger by holding my arms out to my sides. The branch in my hand seemed laughably small now, as the lion took a step in my direction, then another. "In the name of Jesus Christ, stay back," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The lion paused, perhaps confused by the human sound, but only for a moment. Then he began to stalk forward with terrible purpose, his powerful shoulders rolling with each step. I continued backing away, but my heel caught on a hidden root and I stumbled, nearly falling. That slight show of weakness was all the trigger the predator needed. The lion charged, covering the distance between us with shocking speed. I had time only to cry out, "Nossa Senhora Aparecida, save me!" before raising my arm in a futile attempt to protect my throat. What happened next defies rational explanation. As the lion leaped, the air between us seemed to shimmer like heat rising from sun-baked earth. But this was different, a ripple in reality itself. The lion's roar cut off abruptly as he froze in mid-air, suspended as if time itself had stopped. And in that impossible moment, the air before me began to glow with a soft blue light that quickly intensified to a brilliant azure gold radiance. Within this luminous presence, a form took shape, a woman of indescribable beauty, her features both gentle and powerful. She wore flowing blue robes over a simple white dress, and atop her head sat a delicate crown that seemed made of light itself. Though I had never seen her in person, I recognized her immediately. Nossa Senhora Aparecida, the dark Madonna of Brazil, patroness of my homeland. Yet here, in this moment, her skin glowed not with the familiar darkness of her traditional image, but with a light that seemed to come from within, as if she were made of living amber. Her eyes met mine with such compassion that tears sprang unbidden to my eyes. She spoke no words, yet I felt rather than heard her message. Be not afraid, my son. I am with you always. Then she turned toward the still suspended lion, raising one hand in a gesture that was not threatening, but commanding. The great beast's expression changed from predatory rage to something I can only describe as reverence. Slowly, impossibly, the lion's body rotated in the air until his paws touched the ground. He stood perfectly still, gazing at the apparition with the same awe that must have been written across my own face. Nossa Senhora Aparecida looked once more at me, a smile of infinite tenderness crossing her luminous features. Then she gestured toward the lion and back to me, her meaning clear. We would not harm each other. As quickly as she had appeared, the blue-gold light began to fade, her form dissolving back into the African air until only the faintest shimmer remained, like dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. The lion and I stood regarding each other across 10 feet of savanna. The great predator's eyes had changed, the killer instinct replaced by something almost contemplative. For several heartbeats, we remained locked in this impossible standoff. Then, with deliberate slowness, the lion turned and walked away, his tail low, his mighty head swinging once to look back at me before he disappeared into the tall grass. I sank to my knees, my body trembling with adrenaline and wonder. Tears streamed down my face as the full reality of what had just occurred washed over me. Nossa Senhora Aparecida, Mary, the Mother of Christ, had manifested in the wilds of Kenya to save me from certain death. The small medallion my grandmother had given me burned warm against my chest, as if in confirmation of the miracle. How long I knelt there, I cannot say. Time seemed meaningless after what I had witnessed. Eventually, the distant call of my name broke through my dazed reverie. Villagers from Nkongu, concerned when I hadn't arrived on schedule, had formed a search party. When they found me kneeling in the clearing, still clutching my grandmother's medallion, they approached with caution, having seen the lion's tracks surrounding me. The story poured out of me in a jumble of English, Portuguese, and broken Ma. I expected disbelief, perhaps even concern for my mental state after such trauma. Instead, the Maasai warriors listened with solemn attention. When I finished, the oldest among them, a man named Lanana, nodded slowly. "We have stories," he said in his careful English, "of the great spirits who protect those chosen for important work. Your Mary spirit has shown herself strong in our land. This is a powerful sign." The walk back to the village took on the quality of a procession. The warriors formed a protective circle around me, though I felt certain no harm would come to us that day. One young man had been sent ahead to spread the news, and as we approached Nkongu, the entire community had gathered at the outskirts. I was brought directly to the central meeting tree, where the elders waited. For hours, I sat with them, telling and retelling the story of Nossa Senhora's appearance. As night fell, a fire was built, and more people arrived from neighboring homesteads. My original purpose, bringing medicine to a sick child, was not forgotten. The mother brought her feverish daughter to me right there by the fire, and I administered the treatment with hands that still trembled slightly from my experience. That night marked a transformation. What had begun as a personal miracle quickly became something larger. The Maasai, with their rich spiritual tradition, had no difficulty accepting the reality of divine intervention. What surprised me was how they embraced Nossa Senhora Aparecida not as a foreign deity, but as a powerful manifestation of the same God they had always known. They gave her a Maasai name, Enka Kenya Enkai, the compassionate Mother of God. Word spread across the savannah with incredible speed. Within days, people from villages I had never visited arrived at our mission, asking to hear the story directly from me. I told it faithfully each time, neither embellishing nor diminishing the wonder of what had occurred. Many asked to be baptized, seeing in this miracle a confirmation of the Christian message I had been living among them. 2 weeks after the incident, something even more extraordinary happened. A Maasai hunter came to the mission at dawn, his face alight with excitement. He led me and a group of elders to a spot about 5 miles from where I had encountered the lion, and there, drinking calmly from a stream, was the same male lion, identifiable by a distinctive notch in his right ear. What made this sighting remarkable was not just the lion's presence, but what he allowed. The hunter had approached within 30 feet, and the lion had merely watched him, showing no aggression. "The lion has been changed," the hunter said with conviction. "Nkakenya Enkai has touched him as she touched you." In the months that followed, reports came from throughout the region of this same lion being seen near villages without attacking livestock or showing typical predatory behavior. The Maasai began to call him the priest's lion, and his presence was considered a blessing rather than a threat. Wildlife biologists who heard these reports were baffled, coming to study this unusual behavior. They offered scientific explanations. Perhaps the lion had been injured in a way that made hunting normal prey difficult, or maybe human habituation had altered his natural instincts. I listened to their theories with respect, but knew in my heart the truth of what had happened. A year after the miracle, we built a small chapel at the site of Nossa Senhora's appearance. It was a simple structure of local stone, with a roof of thatched grass, but it became a place of pilgrimage for Catholics throughout Kenya and eventually from other parts of Africa as well. I placed a replica of the Nossa Senhora Aparecida statue from Basilica in Brazil on the altar, but the Maasai artists created their own interpretations as well. Beautiful carvings that showed Mary with both Brazilian and Maasai features. Her blue robes decorated with the beaded patterns of Maasai tradition. The most profound change, however, was within me. Before the miracle, I had been a faithful priest, yes, but one who sometimes approached my vocation with intellectual distance. The reality of God's presence through Mary had shattered that distance forever. I now understood faith not as a set of beliefs, but as an encounter with mystery, a mystery as real and tangible as the African earth beneath my feet. My ministry transformed as well. The story of the lion and Nossa Senhora drew people to our mission who might never have approached a church otherwise, but I was careful not to exploit the miracle for conversions. Instead, I focused on building bridges between Catholic teaching and Maasai wisdom, finding the places where our understanding of God's love converged rather than conflicted. 5 years have passed since that day in the savannah. Our mission has grown into a thriving parish with several chapels across the region. The school now has 3 classrooms and teachers trained in both national curriculum and Maasai cultural knowledge. The clinic has expanded with help from Brazilian Catholic charities who heard my story and felt a connection to this distant African mission. The priest's lion still roams the territory, now aging with dignity, his mane graying slightly. He has never harmed a human, though he has returned to hunting wild game. Sometimes when I travel between villages, I catch glimpses of him watching from a distance, as if keeping guard. The biologists remain confounded, but the Maasai simply nod knowingly. Some mysteries are not meant to be explained by science. I still wear my grandmother's medallion of Nossa Senhora Aparecida. Its familiar weight against my heart reminds me daily of the thin veil between ordinary reality and divine presence. I've been asked many times why Mary chose to appear here, so far from Brazil, where her devotion is strongest. I have no definitive answer, but I believe it speaks to a truth at the heart of our faith, that God's love, manifested through Mary's compassion, knows no boundaries of geography, culture, or language. Last month, my parents finally made the long journey from Brazil to visit my Kenyan home. Watching my father, now stooped with age but still sharp-minded, stand at the sight of the miracle, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, I felt the circle of my life close in perfect harmony. My mother placed fresh flowers at the foot of Nossa Senhora's statue, whispering prayers in Portuguese that blended with the Maasai women's traditional songs outside. In moments of quiet reflection, I often return to that clearing and sit alone, listening to the savanna winds. Sometimes I feel her presence still, not in dramatic manifestation, but in the gentle certainty that I am exactly where I am meant to be, doing the work I was created to do. The hands that João said would feed many have indeed done so, providing not just physical nourishment, but spiritual sustenance to a community that has become my second family. And you, have you ever felt the presence of Mary in your life? Perhaps not in such a dramatic encounter, but in those moments of grace when help arrives just when most needed. Our Lady continues to work miracles large and small throughout the world. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to share it with others who might need reassurance of heaven's watchful care. For in this fragmented world, we need reminders that we are never truly alone, that divine love crosses every boundary and speaks every language, even the ancient language between predator and prey on the Kenyan savannah.